Caitlin Clark could be breaking another record, this time with an endorsement deal. The Associated Press says Clark will soon be signing an 8-year, $28 million contract with Nike.
She's got 36. She lives for those moments, Gus. She wants to take the big shot, and she will make the big shot.
Caitlin Clark just did what no one thought possible.
Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark.
Caitlin Clark.
Caitlin Clark.
Caitlin Clark.
Caitlin Clark.
She flipped the entire sports marketing world on its head.
What did she do? What did she just do?
Do I need to call you the female version of Steph Curry, or do I need to call Steph Curry the male version of Caitlin Clark? I mean, which one is it?
In a jaw-dropping moment, the basketball sensation revealed a $200 million Nike deal so massive it sent shockwaves through boardrooms and locker rooms alike. This isn't just a contract, it's a statement, a seismic shift in how women's sports are valued, sold, and celebrated. Adidas, blindsided, executives in chaos, and fans still catching their breath. So, how did we get here, and what does it mean for the future of the game? Let's take a closer look. The deal that redefined everything. In April 2024, just days before she was officially selected as the #1 overall pick in the WNBA draft, Caitlin Clark quietly signed a deal that would rattle the foundations of sports marketing. It wasn't just a contract, it was a cultural moment. At the time, the agreement was said to be worth $28 million over 8 years, instantly making her one of the highest-paid female athletes in basketball history. But even that jaw-dropping figure turned out to be just the beginning. The deal with Nike wasn't your average endorsement package. It included a full-scale rollout of Clark's own signature basketball shoe, an incredibly rare achievement in the women's game. Only a handful of WNBA legends have ever reached that level of market demand. But Clark, fresh out of the University of Iowa, was already rewriting the rules. Alongside the shoe line, the partnership expanded to include branded apparel, high-performance training gear, and a powerful marketing push that centered around Clark's infectious energy and game-changing talent. From the moment she stepped into the WNBA in May 2024, Caitlin's influence exploded. Within weeks, her Indiana Fever jersey became the best-selling item in the league. TV ratings for her debut games smashed records, pulling in over 1 million viewers per game. Numbers previously unheard of in the WNBA. She wasn't just playing basketball. She was pulling in crowds, moving product, and putting women's sports in a primetime spotlight usually reserved for male athletes. Major brands took notice fast. Gatorade jumped in, aligning its image with Clark's relentless work ethic and all-American appeal. H&R Block joined in with a campaign that cleverly blended sports and financial literacy. Even tech and wellness brands began circling, eager to tie their names to the biggest breakout athlete since Serena Williams. Clark wasn't just building an endorsement portfolio, she was building an empire. But behind the scenes, something even more seismic was brewing. Nike had reportedly gone back to the table. The original $28 million deal was now seen as only a starting point. Analysts whispered that Clark's market value had tripled in just 6 months. Internal sources hinted that a renegotiated deal was in motion, one that could top $200 million in total value, including long-term performance bonuses, equity incentives, and expanded global rights. If true, this new deal would obliterate every record in women's sports marketing history and position Clark as not just the face of the WNBA, but a global icon with the power to bend billion-dollar brands to her will. Meanwhile, Adidas was reportedly blindsided. Sources close to the situation claimed that their offer, which included a signature line and global campaign, was completely outmatched by Nike's aggressive pivot. The tension between the two apparel giants began boiling over in July 2025 as leaked internal emails revealed frustration and fury at missing out on the most electrifying athlete of the decade. So, here's where Nike's bold gamble flipped the script and left Adidas scrambling in disbelief. Keep glued to see why. Why Nike took a $200 million gamble. For decades, the world of sports endorsements told a lopsided story. one where male athletes collected blockbuster deals while even the most dominant women in sports earned a fraction of that value. Serena Williams, Simone Biles, and a few other giants broke through occasionally, but the system was never built to value women athletes equally. That's what made Caitlin Clark's rise not just impressive, but revolutionary. By mid-2025, Clark had done more than dominate on the court. She had cracked open the door to an entirely new economic reality. When she first inked her Nike deal in April 2024, just before the WNBA draft, the $28 million price tag felt enormous. But it was still rooted in old industry expectations. At the time, even the biggest women's sports stars rarely approached those numbers. Clark, however, didn't just fit the mold, she broke it. From Iowa to Indiana, every step of her journey has defied the past. Her WNBA debut was one of the most watched in league history. Tickets to her games sold out across the country. Fans lined up for hours in Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago just for a chance to watch her shoot. Her jersey quickly became the top seller, not just in the WNBA, but among all pro basketball rookies in 2024, male or female. This sudden surge wasn't just about basketball, it was business. Clark wasn't just bringing fans, she was bringing revenue. And that caught Nike's attention in a major way. Historically, the brand has invested billions into building its basketball empire. From Michael Jordan's Air Jordans to LeBron James's billion-dollar lifetime deal, Nike has mastered the art of turning athletes into cultural symbols and product lines into global empires. But until recently, women were rarely at the center of that strategy. That started to change slowly, with players like Sabrina Ionescu and Breanna Stewart. Still, no one had created the kind of market frenzy Clark unleashed. By the summer of 2025, Nike was reportedly reevaluating its entire women's basketball investment portfolio, and Clark was at the center of it all. Sources suggest the company's internal projections for Clark's merchandise sales were shattered within months. Signature shoe concepts were greenlit faster than any WNBA athlete in Nike history. Marketing budgets were increased. International campaigns began testing her name in untapped markets across Europe and Asia. What followed was a bold, almost unheard-of move. Nike began preparing an upgraded deal, rumored to be worth $200 million. It was a statement to the entire industry. Clark wasn't just a rising star, she was a one-woman economy, and Nike wasn't about to let Adidas, Puma, or Under Armour get anywhere close. Still, questions lingered. Was this a one-off miracle, or had Clark truly opened the floodgates for a new generation of elite female endorsements? And was Nike prepared to keep pace in a world that was finally starting to see women's sports not as a niche, but as the future? And now, has Caitlin Clark sparked a revolution in women's sports, or is this just the beginning? Keep watching. The battle they thought they could win. For years, Adidas played the long game in women's sports. While Nike dominated headlines with flashy signings and big-money shoe deals, Adidas positioned itself as the brand of authenticity, focusing on culture, lifestyle, and community. Their strategy was subtle, but deliberate. Back athletes who weren't just stars, but symbols. Tennis phenoms, global soccer icons, and rising WNBA players quietly became faces of Adidas campaigns, each one chosen for what they stood for off the court as much as on it. But in early 2024, that strategy ran into a storm named Caitlin Clark. Behind the scenes, Adidas had been tracking Clark for years. Her college dominance at the University of Iowa wasn't just about stats, it was about movement. She wasn't playing basketball, she was changing the way people watched it. By the time the WNBA draft approached in April 2024, Adidas had already prepared a bold pitch. Sources close to the brand say the proposal included a full signature line, international lifestyle campaigns, and a multi-year deal that would position Clark as the face of a new Adidas era in women's basketball. And then, in a single moment, it all fell apart. Nike swooped in fast, or too fast. With a reported $28 million deal, they locked Clark in just before the draft. What made it even more brutal for Adidas was the timing. Their team, insiders say, had been preparing a counteroffer, a bigger one. They believed Clark was worth more, and they were ready to go all in. But Nike wasn't waiting around to compete. They moved first and won. By July 2025, the wound had turned to fury. Nike wasn't just holding on to Clark, they were planning to double down. Rumors of a renegotiated $200 million mega deal hit the sports world like an earthquake. Adidas execs were stunned. Not only had they missed out on a generational talent, they were now watching her turn Nike into a force of nature in women's basketball. For Adidas, this wasn't just a lost endorsement. It was a strategic failure. They'd identified women's basketball as a market where they could finally gain real ground. After years of Nike dominating the men's game with Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Kevin Durant, Adidas had hoped to own the next era, an era powered by women. Clark was supposed to be the cornerstone of that plan, and it wasn't just about what Nike gained. It was about what Adidas lost. In sports marketing, locking up a star isn't just about sales. It's about denying your competition the chance to have them. By securing Clark early, Nike had effectively slammed the door shut. Now, every time Clark steps on the court, every time her jersey sells out, every time her face flashes in a Gatorade or Nike campaign, Adidas sees the ghost of a deal that should have been theirs. And that's why Adidas is furious. Not just because they lost, but because they believed, right up until the moment the ink dried, that they were going to win. So, how did Nike snatch Caitlin Clark right out from under Adidas's nose? And why hasn't Adidas recovered? You won't want to miss this. The digital storm that blindsided Adidas. Adidas didn't just lose Caitlin Clark to Nike. They lost her to a completely different era of sports marketing, one they underestimated until it was too late. In a world where sneakers and jerseys no longer sell themselves, Clark came armed with the most powerful weapon of the modern athlete: influence. By mid-2025, Caitlin Clark wasn't just an elite basketball player. She was a global digital brand. With millions of followers across Instagram, TikTok, X, formerly Twitter, and YouTube, Clark didn't need press conferences to shift public opinion. One post, one highlight, one behind-the-scenes moment, and she was instantly driving engagement, attention, and, more importantly, sales. Her highlight reels didn't just go viral in the US, they exploded across Europe and Asia, reaching countries where women's basketball had long struggled for recognition. Nike understood that. Adidas didn't move fast enough. For Adidas, it was a critical miscalculation. They'd spent years trying to position themselves as the more culturally connected brand, investing in athletes who represented community, lifestyle, and authenticity. But what they failed to recognize was that Caitlin Clark embodied all of those things, plus something far rarer: reach. Her digital presence gave Nike something priceless, a direct marketing pipeline to millions of fans already obsessed with her story. No middlemen, no guesswork, just raw numbers, impressions, click-through rates, merchandise conversions. And those numbers were staggering. Behind closed doors, Adidas executives were stunned by the data. Clark's social posts were outperforming entire campaigns. A single Instagram story promoting her signature Nike shoes generated more engagement than some global marketing pushes they'd poured millions into. And with digital analytics now tracking every dollar spent against sales and fan interaction, there was no denying it. Clark's ROI wasn't just good, it was historic. But that wasn't all. Clark's international appeal added salt to Adidas's wounds. She wasn't just big in Iowa or Indiana. She was becoming a household name in Germany, South Korea, and Australia. Fans in Tokyo wore her jerseys. Girls in Paris mimicked her logo three-pointer on playgrounds. For Nike, who'd already mastered global expansion through names like LeBron and Ronaldo, Clark was their next international pillar. For Adidas, the realization was painful. They'd been eyeing women's basketball as a market where they could finally challenge Nike's dominance, and Clark was their best chance to break through. The brand had already started laying the groundwork, targeting key demographics, testing women-led campaigns, and building community sports programs. But without Clark, everything felt smaller. What made it worse? History. The most valuable women's endorsement deals have always lived in tennis: Serena, Sharapova, and Osaka. Adidas believed basketball was the next frontier. They were right, but Nike got there first. And now, with Clark's rumored deal crossing the $200 million mark, the entire industry is shifting. Analysts say her contract has become the new gold standard, not just for women's basketball, but for all of women's sports. And Adidas? They're left watching as a player they nearly signed becomes the blueprint for a marketing revolution they no longer control. So, what did Adidas miss that turned Caitlin Clark into the face of a $200 million revolution? Stay with us to find out. A deal that changed more than a career. When Caitlin Clark signed with Nike in April 2024, the shockwaves didn't just hit endorsement boards. They rattled the entire structure of women's basketball. That one signature didn't just seal a lucrative contract, it marked the beginning of a commercial transformation no one, not even Adidas, was fully prepared for. Suddenly, one athlete had triggered a tidal wave of attention, investment, and opportunity that reshaped the sport from the inside out. By the time Clark's rumored $200 million renegotiation surfaced in July 2025, women's basketball was no longer the quiet, underfunded corner of professional sports. It had become a magnet for global attention. Major sponsors who once overlooked the WNBA were now scrambling to get a piece of the action. Television networks, digital media platforms, and apparel companies began pouring in resources, hoping to ride the momentum Clark had created. What made Adidas furious wasn't just that they missed out on Caitlin Clark. It was that Nike's bold move with her had lifted the entire WNBA, pulling the spotlight toward a league Adidas hadn't invested in early enough. Clark's massive deal opened doors for other players. Endorsements trickled down to rookies and veterans alike. Training facilities improved, charter flights replaced bus rides, and suddenly, the women's game had more viewers, better merchandise sales, and media coverage that finally matched its on-court talent. For Adidas, who had long preached about supporting culture and growth in women's sports, this was a nightmare. Not only had Nike claimed the face of the future, they'd accidentally created an ecosystem of growth where every ripple benefited Nike's brand image and market position. And Clark herself wasn't operating like a traditional athlete under contract. She was calling the shots. Working with top-tier advisors, she'd structured her deals not just for quick payouts, but long-term brand ownership and equity. She wasn't just endorsing shoes, she was building a legacy. That level of empowerment made her even more appealing to the media, brands, and fans, and even harder for Adidas to match. It was the perfect storm, a breakout star, a brand that moved first, and a sport hungry for its moment. Caitlin Clark didn't just sign a deal. She changed the rules of the game, and Adidas, watching from the sidelines, could only wonder how they let it slip through their fingers. And what happens when a single athlete rewrites the rules before the world's biggest brands can react? Stay tuned. This story is far from ending. The viral moment that changed everything. When Caitlin Clark's Nike deal went public in April 2024, the headlines weren't confined to the sports section. It was a story that spilled over into business magazines, pop culture outlets, political panels, and morning news shows. This wasn't just another endorsement. It was a cultural moment. The size of the deal stunned even longtime insiders. But it wasn't just the money that made it historic. It was what the reaction revealed about the future of women's sports and the brands that failed to act fast enough. Within hours of the announcement, Clark's name trended globally across X, TikTok, and Instagram. One tweet from a major sports journalist declaring, "The biggest women's sports deal in history just went to a rookie," racked up over 8 million views overnight. Fans, celebrities, and fellow athletes chimed in. Supporters praised the deal as overdue recognition for women's sports. Critics debated whether any female basketball player was worth that kind of money. But either way, people were talking, and everyone was looking. And that's exactly why Adidas was furious. This wasn't just Nike winning an athlete. It was Nike controlling the conversation. The global spotlight was now shining on Caitlin Clark, and every time her deal was mentioned, every time her highlight reel played, every time her shoes appeared on a digital billboard or TikTok ad, Nike's name was right there, front and center. Adidas, on the other hand, was left watching the spotlight move farther and farther away. In just weeks, Clark became the face of more than basketball. She became the symbol of a new business model in women's sports. The media turned her deal into a case study. Headlines read like business forecasts. Clark's contract redraws endorsement blueprints. Nike sets a new standard in women's sports marketing, and Caitlin Clark breaks the ceiling again. The numbers didn't lie. Online search traffic for Clark skyrocketed. Merchandise sales exploded. And brand interest in the WNBA, long considered a niche product, surged with it. Adidas had been planning to stake a claim in that growing market. But Nike's early move didn't just lock Clark in, it gave them a first-mover advantage in a revolution. The public's overwhelmingly positive response to the deal validated something that had always been undervalued: the commercial power of women's sports. Brands that had hesitated before were now jumping in. Executives who once dismissed women's basketball as low return began reallocating budgets, launching campaigns, and investing in female athletes. Adidas, however, found itself reacting instead of leading. What made it worse for Adidas wasn't just that Caitlin Clark's deal with Nike was trending, it was teaching. It became more than a headline. It became a masterclass in modern sports marketing. Through her interviews, behind-the-scenes content, viral social media posts, and widespread coverage across every major platform, from ESPN to Forbes, fans, brands, and industry watchers were getting a front-row seat to how the business of endorsements really worked. People weren't just impressed by the $200 million figure. They were beginning to understand why it mattered. The public saw how these massive deals do more than line an athlete's pockets. They fund leagues, attract sponsors, drive media coverage, improve team facilities, and even influence how athletes are treated. Suddenly, endorsement money wasn't just about sneakers. It was about power, influence, and transformation. Clark's visibility sparked a broader conversation. Parents, young athletes, and even casual fans were starting to connect the dots between one signature deal and the long-term growth of women's sports. Clark wasn't just making money, she was building momentum for an entire movement. And the most brutal part for Adidas? Nike owned the whole wave. Every dollar, every headline, every moment. It all fed back into Nike's empire, leaving Adidas in the dust. But what do you think? Are women's sports endorsements finally catching up to their true value, or just scratching the surface? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.